We're talking about worldview in this series, and yesterday was Valentine's Day, so I thought I'd start with a picture that connects those two things. I'll start here. This is a picture that I snapped in the mall, walking by one of those t-shirt kiosks, and it pretty much says it all. You think that marriage is the beginning of something? No. From this worldview, marriage is the end. The end of fun, it's the end of freedom, it's the end of unilateral decision-making. It's pretty much game over for you, pal, and this is probably directed toward men. It's game over for you, but so you better think twice about commitment. But if you do commit, fortunately we have this billboard here to help us buy a ring. I don't know if you've ever seen this on the highway. What she says, any ring is fine so long as I have you. Now listen for the worldview messages in here. But what she's thinking, no diamond, how cheap. I'll make his life a living hell, I'll poison his coffee, I'll cut his brake lines, get her a diamond, idiot. Now, what is the message here? Obviously, the message is buy a diamond, it's an advertisement, but what's the message behind the message? Well, perhaps it's that she's not going to be straight with you. That in marriage, she's going to say one thing, but she's going to mean another. And your job is to crack the code. And if you don't crack the code, there are going to be some long-term consequences to that, and it's really going to cost you. So she lies, basically. She wants a diamond. Get her a diamond, idiot. And not just any diamond. Get her maybe this diamond. This is a Cartier ad, the French jeweler. Get her this diamond, because Cartier assures us that this is what extraordinary love looks like. Big rock, no flaws, and lots of fire. And there's a message here, too. The message is pretty clear, actually. A close correlation between what we spend and how much we care. You ever feel that, especially around Valentine's Day, how big of a bouquet to get and those sorts of things? How much we spend and how much we care. If we don't spend very much, maybe we don't care very much. So get her a big diamond, idiot. Our point is, our perspectives on what marriage is and how we should think about that relationship are all over the place. I have a son who, when he was in middle school, said that he thought he would get married someday. Dad, I'm going to get married someday so that I don't have to work. Guess this is what happens when your father's a college professor or something, and this is what you see in your household. But our ideas of marriage are all over the place. Did you know that in Mexico, there is a proposal floating around in the Mexican government to create 2-year marriages? You hear that? 2-year marriages, try it for 2 years. If it doesn't work out, you don't have to renew it. It just expires. It just kind of dissolves. What does that sound like? To me, it sounds a little like a car lease. Marriage is just another commodity. And did you know that in France, you could actually marry somebody who's already passed away? You could marry somebody who's dead. I kid you not. This is a law that has been around for decades, and apparently they get hundreds of requests every year for what's called posthumous marriage. I led one British newspaper to comment that instead of a horse and carriage wedding in France, you can now have a hearse and carriage wedding. Our perspectives are very, very diverse. Let's not lose the point in some of the humor on this. And this doesn't even touch all the turmoil in this country at the federal and the state and the local level regarding what constitutes a marriage. Well, what's going on here? Whatever happened to the Christian worldview of a lifelong covenant between one man and one woman? God made them male and female. And Jesus said, for this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and cling to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. But now, marriage is game over. Marriage is a lease with an option to buy. Marriage is a financial arrangement or something we do for tax reasons. Now it's getting to the point where maybe someday you'll be able to marry your puppy, at least for 2 years, and then if it doesn't work out, you just get another one. I mean, what actually happened? How did this transformation take place? And maybe more importantly for our purposes, why does it matter? And what's at stake for each one of us? Now, to understand this, I need to teach us the Worldview course from my college, and I need to do it in 5 minutes. And the dirty little secret is it can be done in 5 minutes. We just kind of fill up the rest of the 15 weeks with a lot of fluff, but this isn't being recorded, is it? The way to think about this, what's going on with marriage and a host of other issues, is as competing worldviews. You've got a couple of models up here on the screen. Think about it this way. On the left-hand side here, we have a representation of what's called a Christian worldview. Some basic assumptions about God and the world and the connection between the two. And it's a little bit simplistic, but the fundamentals are here. From a Christian perspective, God created the world, God exists, and God created the world, and God is involved in the world, and he reveals his will to us regarding who we are and how we should live our lives. That's what that arrow represents between God and the world there. However, there's another worldview out there, and it's exceedingly pervasive in Western society, and it assumes that there's this unbridgeable barrier between the natural world and the supernatural world, if that supernatural world even exists. It's called a secular worldview, and it doesn't necessarily deny the existence of God, but it insists that that upper realm, what's above the line there, simply isn't knowable. What we can know, they say, is what's below the line, what's observable, what we can experience through our five senses. That's what's real. That's what's true. That's what constitutes knowledge. And think about the implications of this model, of this way of thinking. If we can't know what's in that upper realm, if we have to essentially be agnostic toward that, then what else can't we know? Well, we just said, we can't know if God exists or much about him. We can't know if Jesus is the Son of God. We can't know if a Holy Spirit exists or if we're just here on our own. We can't know if this Bible is anything more than a human book. We can't know if prayer is anything more than talking to the air or talking to our plate. Or we can't know if there are absolute standards of right and wrong. We can't know anything about what happens after we die. None of these things are knowable from a secular perspective. None of these things can be called true or truth, at least not from an objective perspective. What is knowable is what we can see and what we can test. So, for example, I know that if I sit down in that chair over there, it's not going to break. Right? I know that. I can test that, and in fact, I have. I know that it's made out of cloth and aluminum. That is provable. I know that the chair came from China. Now, that's something that is verifiable. But if I sit down in that chair and pray, they'd say there's no way to know if there's a God who will hear that prayer and answer it. Now we've stepped outside the realm of knowledge and truth and into opinion or hope or just delusion. Do you see the enormity of the problem here? Or do you see at least the chasm between these two philosophies? To those who have a secular worldview, Christians are superstitious at best, and maybe a whole lot worse than that. Maybe we're just arrogantly trying to impose our will on others. We're trying to impose nothing more than opinion or preference on everyone else. That's another way of thinking about this model here. That's what's up on the top, mere preference. And once we consign God and God's will to that unknowable realm, then pretty much anything goes, right? This framework is really worth remembering, worth writing down, worth thinking about, because it'll help you understand some of the people around you, your coworkers or family or extended family or friends, and how they think about you, how you think about them, how we communicate with one another. It's a very useful framework. So, full circle back to marriage just for a minute. The Christian view of marriage to a secularist is just one idea, no more or less valid than any other. But when a Christian comes along and says that, wait a minute, it has to be one man and one woman, and divorce has to be hard and not easy, that's not heard by the other side as a truth claim. No, that would be heard more or less as a power play. You're imposing something on me, on us, on society that's just not knowable. And let me tell you, no amount of exegesis, no litany of Bible verses is going to be persuasive in that moment. Why? Because again, that's in the upper realm. That Bible, it's just a human book, not something authoritative from a higher being. Nobody can know that. And once we turn that corner, and I'd say that we have turned that corner, in fact, decades ago, there's an explosion of everyday manifestations of this secular perspective. Marriage is merely one of them. Think about the music that we listen to. It's just replete with some of these secular messages. Just take this song, for example, from John Lennon, one that many of us are familiar with, and hear it in the context of this two-story view of reality. Lennon sings, "Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us. Above us, only sky, only something that we can see. Imagine all the people living for today, the here and now, the temporal, the observable. Imagine there are no countries. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for, and no religion, too. Imagine all the people living life in peace." Do you hear it? No hell, no heaven, no religion, above us only sky. Live as if there were no upper realm. Right? We'd all be better off. The secular worldview, we find it everywhere in our music lyrics. And it doesn't mean we can't enjoy this kind of music, and it doesn't mean that we shouldn't listen to this music. What it does mean is that we should know what we're listening to, and that we should filter the messages so that we're not unduly influenced by them. Secular worldview in marriage, secular worldview in music, it's also firmly embedded in our education system, especially our public education system in this country, which has largely been turned into a religion-free zone. Some of you know that firsthand. But why is that? It's because in school, we're teaching knowledge, allegedly. We're teaching knowledge, and what's in this upper realm here, that's just opinion. That's not knowledge. And so it has no place in our curriculum, they'd say. We have to sequester that. And so we get these kind of humorous cartoons that show up from time to time to poke fun at what's going on in education. This year's multicultural generic holiday play is Mary and the Magic Baby. It's kind of funny, but in a way it's not funny at all. This is the fruit of a secular worldview, and it's just one small example. I heard a story of a 5-year-old in the United Kingdom who, after watching one of these generic holiday plays, asked his mother, "Why is it that Mary named her baby after a swear word?" For some, that's all this upper realm is good for. In marriage, in music, in education, even in some of our churches, we see this encroaching on us, where they start to water down the truth of the gospel to be palatable to those who have a secular worldview. But in doing so, we undo our very distinctive. We undo our very calling and our mission. Even some of our churches have been susceptible to this drift. And consider how many messages there are all around us all day, every day, that advance this secular philosophy. Whether it comes from bumper stickers or from TV shows just going clockwise around here, or advice columnists and some of the counsel that we get from them, from celebrities and how they live their lives or what they communicate to us, from social media, the people we follow, the friends we have, the athletes that we follow, and so on. From protest marches, we see a secular point of view come through loud and clear there quite often. From Supreme Court decisions, from congressional legislation and other public policy, from advertisements, from magazines, from movies, media, you name it. We're absolutely marinated in these messages every day. And the common denominator, don't miss this, the common denominator through this all is the assumption, the presupposition that the only truths that we can know for sure are those that we can observe. And through all of those messages, ingesting hundreds, thousands of those messages every week, we can be changed, we can be influenced, we can drift. In fact, it's almost inevitable. And we never even see it coming. We just kind of live our life in this world, but one day we realize that this world has started to live in us. And that's what's at stake. And every one of us is vulnerable. If you have a Bible, please turn with me to the Gospel of John, chapter 18. We're going to start at verse 33 there. And if you don't have a Bible, it's fine. We're going to have the scriptures on the screen. But I want to show you something here. What we're talking about is not just a modern day issue. This tension is a long-standing issue that it's before the 21st century. It predates the Enlightenment. It goes back before the Renaissance. In fact, here's an exchange that we're going to see from 2,000 years ago between Jesus and Pontius Pilate, who's the governor of Judea at the time. Now, you might recall the religious leaders had turned Jesus over to Pilate and wanted him killed for blasphemy. because the Jewish leaders couldn't kill him themselves. They weren't allowed to, so they turn him over to the Romans. And here Pilate begins interrogating Jesus, beginning at verse 33. Pilate summoned Jesus and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "Is that your own idea?" Jesus asked. "Or did others talk to you about me?" Now, Pilate wants a straight answer here, but he's not getting one, and so he's going to get a little annoyed. Jesus, the criminal, just answered a question with a question. So Pilate says, "Am I a Jew? Your own people and chief priests handed you over to me. What is it that you have done?" Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. My kingdom is from another place." "Ah, you're a king then," says Pilate. He's mocking him, of course. I mean, just look at this guy. He's beaten and in chains. All he has is the clothes on his back. But you're a king, huh? Well, Jesus answers him. "You say that I'm a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into this world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me." And Pilate kind of scoffs. What is truth? And with that, he walked out. He just walked right on by Jesus and left the room. Interrogation over, nothing to learn here. What is truth, he asked. Most scholars say that Pilate is scoffing, or at best shrugging his shoulders. D.A. Carson, who's a fine scholar from Trinity Evangelical Divinity School, says that Pilate is convinced that there's no answer, or more likely, that he doesn't want to hear it. Miroslav Volf, a world-class scholar from Yale Divinity School, says that Pilate scorns the very notion of truth and is uninterested in any answer. And Ben Witherington of Asbury Theological Seminary down in Kentucky puts it a little more bluntly. He says that Pilate concludes that Jesus is a deluded quack. Now, however we say it, Pilate is called to judge truth in this trial, but he dismisses the entire notion of truth. He just walks out. And maybe that's somewhat understandable, at least given the model that we just talked about here. You see, in Roman culture, the emperor was divine. But emperors are observable. We can see them. We can experience them. They're below the line. Other gods, who knows? Right? It's this polytheistic society, but God is a concept. God is an abstraction, not necessarily a person, and not necessarily the source of all truth, especially to a practical and political man like Pilate. So he asks the big question, but he doesn't wait around for an answer because he probably thinks there isn't an answer. And certainly not from somebody like Jesus. And that's part of the tragedy of this exchange. You see, Pilate walked away from the one person of his day who could answer his question. And if you fast forward 20 centuries to today, maybe some of us are doing exactly the same thing. And maybe that's because we've been conditioned for so long by a culture that insists that this guy, Jesus, he doesn't really have any answers. He's not knowable, just some guy from 2 millennia ago. And so at some point, maybe we start to believe that, and we just walk away. Maybe you have some legitimate questions about the things that matter the most. Maybe you have some legitimate questions about what's really knowable, about whether there is a God and what he's really like and what he might think of you. Maybe you have some legitimate questions about who this person, Jesus, is or was, and what, if anything, that would mean for you. Some questions about your purpose in this life. What's the meaning of it all? And how we should live our life. Maybe you have some legitimate questions about what happens to people after they die. What happens to you after you die? If you do have those kind of questions, you may not find a whole lot of answers out there in the world, because the basic posture of our society toward these larger existential questions is a posture of agnosticism and relativism. But if you're willing to look for them, you may find some answers in this Gospel of John. You see, John, an apostle of Jesus, a disciple of Jesus, had a whole lot to say about truth and about what's reality and about what it is that we can count on. In fact, in his 21-chapter gospel, we see 46 instances of John talking about truth. And here's just a sampling. In chapter 1, Jesus came from the Father, full of grace and truth. In chapter 8, Jesus says, "You'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free." You've heard that before. In chapter 14, Jesus says, I am the way and the truth and the life. And in our passage for today, Jesus said, I came into the world to testify to the truth. And then Pilate's question, what is truth? And interestingly, this is the very last of these 46 references in the Gospel of John. 45 times John tells us there is truth, this is truth, and points us to truth. And then we get Pilate's question, what is truth? Do you think that the writer of the Gospel is maybe trying to tell us something here? What is truth? Truth is found in a person. Jesus is truth incarnate. Well, if you're like I am, you might say, that's fine, but you might object a little bit. You say, okay, I see that. I've heard some of this stuff before. Cerebrally, I kind of get this stuff, but how? How can I know what is truth and what isn't? How can I know which ideas to believe and which ones to dismiss? You can say that Jesus is truth, professor or pastor or whatever it is that you are up there, but practically speaking, I don't know what to do with that. That is a fair question if you're thinking that, even just a little bit. We don't want to be in a position of offering destinations without directions. And so let me close with a practical piece of advice. And actually, it's advice from Jesus himself. Many people are familiar with John 8:32. It's right here on the screen. You'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free. And in fact, it's even quoted by those who would deny the divinity of Jesus, even those who might be agnostic toward that whole question. We see it, for example, over the great halls of knowledge. You go into some public university, classroom building, and you see it right there. The truth will set you free. And in the Ivy Leagues and so on, it's just right there emblazoned in the classroom buildings. Oddly enough, they never cite it. They just kind of plagiarize it. But that aside, what fewer people seem to understand is that just before Jesus said that there is a truth and we can know it and we can be liberated from this confusion and this consternation, we can actually be set free from this existential crisis that we might be in. He gives us a practical method by which we can get there. All you have to do is back up one verse to verse 31. The thought in context looks like this. To the Jews who had believed him, Jesus said, if you hold to my teaching, you're really my disciples. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Did you ever catch that juxtaposition in the gospel? If you hold to my teaching, that's the prerequisite. That's the antecedent. That's the condition there. If you follow me, if you do what I've asked you to do, then you'll finally get some answers. See, Jesus is saying, see for yourself. There are a lot of philosophies out there, a lot of worldviews, a lot of people vying for your mind, a lot of people vying for your life. But test out my way. It's a better way. My teaching is truth. Follow me faithfully and I'll show you. See, Pilate asked the right question, and he asked it to the right person, but then he walked away from the answer. That doesn't have to be you. If you want to really know answers to questions like what is truth, what is right and wrong, what should my marriage look like, or this other relationship that I'm in, what should my parenting look like, my business, my career, what's the purpose of my life, and what happens after this life? If you really want answers to the biggest, most important questions that we can ask, don't just walk away from Jesus like Pilate did. Why not hang around and see what he has to say?